The Las Vegas Raiders head coach Pete Carroll was recently on a podcast, specifically a Seattle sports podcast. And on that podcast, he was asked multiple questions. One being about Tom Brady, the relationship that he has with Brady, and kind of what this guy brings to the Raiders. And Pete Carroll kind of says some interesting things, and I want to talk about what he said. But I want you guys to listen to this, and then we'll just talk about this on the other side.
How much interaction do you have with Tom Brady?
Pretty regular. We're phone buddies, man. He hasn't been out here, but one time I think since we've been here. But we've talked a ton of times, and talking philosophy with Tom is, well, you can imagine what a thrill it is, because he is just he's the all-time competitor, and it's not just how he played, it's how he lived and how he sees the world, and how he attacks every opportunity that he has. And so we're so eye to eye on that. It's been a blast. That's really been fun. But the challenge of it is to bring that mentality and connect it to an entire franchise, and so it was. When Tom came on board here, it changed my outlook, to come here. Yeah, I mean, I thought that would be one of the great opportunities of all time, to have his presence, because his presence is strong, and big factor with John Spytek as well. They go back a ton of years, and Johnny holds him in highest of regard. And so we're trying to infuse Tom's mentality. We're trying to bring it into the organization because it's so good, and it's so unique, and he's so one of a kind that I think it helps us have the opportunity to be a one of a kind franchise.
So there you guys have it, right? Obviously, Pete Carroll was asked about that relationship, and he pretty much put it out there. Me and Tom Brady are pretty much talking regularly. We're phone buddies. Pete Carroll's talking a little bit about how he talked about philosophy with Tom Brady, and how that's a great opportunity for Carroll, because obviously we know what Tom Brady has done in the NFL. And then he even threw it out there that Tom Brady coming to the Raiders kind of changed my outlook on wanting to come to the Raiders, right? Almost implying that he wasn't 100% sold to come to the Las Vegas Raiders until Tom Brady kind of got on board, right? And let's be honest, we already knew, right? Like, as Tom Brady kind of started to influence the Raiders over the past 2 seasons, and I know it became official more recently than that, but we've been hearing rumors, right? And we knew that this was something that was potentially coming. Tom Brady over the last 2 years, right? That influence that he's kind of had over the Raiders, and kind of where the Raiders are at today. I think the Raiders are arguably in the best spot over the last 20 years, right? It's probably today in kind of that direction we're headed. And I think Tom Brady definitely has a big part in that. But one of the interesting things that Pete Carroll did say is that Tom Brady has only been to Las Vegas one time, or at least he's only been in the building when Pete Carroll's been there one time. And I'd be surprised if Pete Carroll hasn't been in the building pretty much every day. I'd be surprised if that has not been the case. So Tom Brady isn't really in the building for the Raiders, which I kind of find interesting, right? Not that it's surprising, right? John Spytek said something similar in the past, although he didn't say that specifically. He did say something similar as well, right? Tom Brady's not really involved. But he did also imply that if he needed Tom Brady, Brady's made himself super open. And obviously Pete Carroll's telling us that he's phone buddies with Tom Brady. And it is just interesting, right? Because I will be honest with you guys. I think Tom Brady's really changed the outlook of the Raiders. You think about the past 20 to 30 years, right? The Raiders have probably had 2 good quarterbacks, right? Derek Carr, Rich Gannon. Jason Campbell is pretty good as well. But, in terms of having success, right? We've had probably 2 quarterbacks in the last 20 to 30 years that have had success for the Raiders. And one of the interesting things with that is Tom Brady's been here for a year, right? And he's already landed us a quarterback, the hardest position to find. This guy's already found a guy for the Raiders, right? And of course, that's Geno Smith. You get here, you get a quarterback. And then more than that, the direction that the Raiders are on, I think, is the best direction we've been on in the last 15 years. You could tell based off of what John Spytek did in this first season, in the draft, the free agency period. This guy's going to build things out the right way, right? I solely believe in this philosophy. You never want to overspend in free agency, and you never want to reach when it comes to the NFL draft, right? And the Raiders pretty much did not reach. They did not overspend. I think they did everything the exact way you'd want to do. The only the only way you want to spend big money in free agency is if you're getting a top 5 player at their position. That too, it's a position that translates. Linebackers, safeties, those positions don't generally translate. But you can add a wide receiver, right? If it's T. Higgins, you can add him. He'll go from team to team, and he'll still be really, really good. If you add Christian Wilkins, a D tackles translate, right? To me, the Raiders did a really good job in free agency by not overspending. They did a really good job in the draft. They got a lot of value, right? Guys that I personally would say it's valuable. Charles Grant, obviously being one of the guys. Guy has a ton of upside. But what I see from the Raiders right now in terms of direction, I think they're on the right path. And I feel like Tom Brady has had such a huge influence on the Raiders and making sure we have guys in the building that can get it done. Making sure we have that quarterback to put us on the right path. Right, so we'll see what the Raiders do as we kind of go forward. I do like the fact that Pete Carroll is telling us kind of some insight with Brady and the philosophy aspect of it. I would be very, very interested to hear Pete Carroll and Tom Brady sit down and just kind of talk scheme. We'll never get that, but I do find it interesting and would love to kind of see or hear or listen to these guys kind of talk. Either way, let's switch focus. There's a ton of other things that are kind of coming out. Some of you guys have probably already seen this, but the Raiders did go out there and they did hire another person essentially in the front office. So the Raiders are hiring Eagles Senior Director of Scouting Brandon Hunt as their Vice President of Player Personnel under new General John Spytek, a highly respected talent evaluator and strong addition in Vegas. Some people are posting on social media that Brandon Hunt is one of those guys that's going to be a general manager within the next 10 years. This guy's apparently a very, very, very smart hire for the Raiders. And we're hiring him as the vice president of player personnel, right? So, player personnel is gonna look at the current NFL players. They're gonna keep in mind all the free agents that are coming up, all the guys, UFL, CFL, those type of things as well. And they're gonna make sure that if a guy gets cut, practice squad guy or whatever it might be, they're gonna keep an eye on those guys, right? And I always think this, right? So, never overspend in free agency and always try to get high value players, right? Guys that are kind of flying under the radar. Robert Spillane as an example, Zach Bond as well, right? Went to the Eagles, had a phenomenal season this past season. I always think the best value is in underrated players, right? Guys that aren't going to get a ton of money. Christian Ellis, the Raiders tried bringing him in from the Patriots. He would be another example of these type of guys. Brandon Hunt is one of those guys that's going to get a ton of he's going to be tasked with a lot of responsibility, right? And for the Raiders, I like this hire. I am always skeptical, though, to be 100% honest. I think the general manager should always be the guy getting all the credit. Any other position, right? Like, we don't really know what they're actually doing. Even then, sometimes you'll label a guy as like the director of scouting, for example. And we don't really know if they're 100% in charge of scouting, right? Like, yeah, they might be the guys that put the staff together, but are they drawing up that final board, right? So we don't really know what guys do, but I will say this. The Eagles do run things a little bit differently. As do the Buccaneers, right? They run things a little bit differentently. Howie Roseman, the Eagles general manager, does put a lot of, he does put a lot of pressure into, like, the scouts. Not even pressure. Pressure is not the right word. He gives these guys a lot of influence, right? This guy will legitimately say, hey, which offensive lineman do we take? With we have a 5th round pick. Who's the guy that we need to take? And he'll let his scout essentially tell him, like, this is the guy and this is why, right? And he'll, ask 2 or 3 scouts. There was a video that they put out, and he did exactly that, right? And Howie Roseman's guys have had a lot of success in the NFL. In fact, the Raiders have taken a lot of those guys as well, which is kind of interesting. But I like the hire. Brandon Hunt is obviously going to be a general manager, in my opinion, in a couple of years, maybe within the next 10 years at some point. Highly respected talent evaluator, right? And that's one of those things that's kind of on social media. A lot of people have kind of stated that. The Raiders obviously posted about it as well. He comes over from the Eagles, where he spent part of the Super Bowl championship team. He most recently served as the senior director of scouting in 2024 after 2 seasons as the director of scouting. So you guys can see that. Prior to his arrival in Philadelphia, Hunt spent 12 seasons as the pro scouting coordinator with the Steelers. I do think he overlapped with John Spytek at some point. I believe it was while he was with the Steelers. Don't quote me on that. There you guys have it, right? So pretty cool, pretty solid hiring. Let's switch focus, man. We got 2 more things that I kind of want to talk about. They're not really related to the Raiders, to be honest with you guys, but it is interesting nonetheless, right? So Adam Schefter just put this report out there recently. In specific to Jalen Ramsey, Adam Schefter reported that there's more interest in Jalen Ramsey than people realize. Apparently, the trade could be announced in June potentially. Schefter noted if the trade happens before, it wouldn't be processed until after June 1 for cap reasons. Right now, the Miami Dolphins are shopping Jalen Ramsey still, and apparently the Raiders could be a team that's interested in Ramsey. Ramsey has in the past stated he would have, loved to go to Las Vegas as a destination. And where, the Jalen Ramsey and Miami Dolphins split, that was announced like a month and a half ago, but nothing ever really materialized, right? And a part of that comes down to the fact that Jalen Ramsey is not willing to go to certain teams, right? So he's taken certain teams off of his radar. And he's made it known that these might be like the 4 or 5 teams that I want to go to. We don't know if the Raiders are one of those teams, to be honest with you. I would think Jalen Ramsey wants to win a ring. And I think some players might perceive the Raiders as a team that's not competing, although I would disagree with it. Jalen Ramsey probably has a list of teams. Now, there is a chance the Raiders are on it, right? We don't really know, right? Jalen Ramsey could value a guy like Pete Carroll, Tom Brady, John Spytek. The Raiders are obviously, in my opinion, going to potentially reach out and see if they can make a trade happen. Now, another part of this trade is obviously if the Dolphins do trade Jalen Ramsey, it'd be a post June 1st trade. For them, they would save cap at that point. The Raiders would obviously bring in Jalen Ramsey and potentially have to extend him, right? And I do think from a cap perspective, the Raiders do have cap, and if they wanted to bring in Jalen Ramsey, they definitely can. I think they have enough cap where for the next 2 years, this could make sense. And I think Jalen Ramsey's still one of the top 5 corners. I've said this multiple times where I think cornerback is a system position, and I do agree with that, but there are exceptions to that rule. Charles Woodson, for example, is an exception. He can go anywhere and he'll be a superstar, right? Jalen Ramsey's another exception. Jalen Ramsey can go anywhere and he'll be a superstar. It's very, very rare you get Jalen Ramsey or Charles Woodson, though, right? Let's just be honest. Every year at the draft, you get 3 great offensive linemen, you get 3 great defensive linemen. You don't always get 3 great cornerbacks. In fact, most of the time, you don't even get 1 great cornerback. Right, you just get a bunch of system guys that no one really knows, right? And that's what happens most of the time, truth be told. Derek Stingley was probably the last great cornerback that came out, and that was, 3 years ago? And before him, maybe it was Jalen Ramsey. I don't even know who it was before that, right? So you don't get a great all-pro shutdown type of corner, which is why I say it's a system position, because every year there's still great corners in the NFL, right? But usually year to year it changes, right? Especially if guys go from one scheme to another. Linebackers kind of the same thing, right? Like Robert Splains, average with the Steelers, becomes a top 10 linebacker with the Raiders under Patrick Graham. Zach Bond goes under the radar, signs with the Eagles, plays under Vic Fangio. Obviously, Vic Fangio is one of the top 5 defensive coordinators in the NFL, and he becomes an all-pro player, right? He becomes one of the top 5 linebackers. I would think that if Zach Bond ends up going and playing for, Josh McDaniels, he would not be a top 5 linebacker. Either way, I think Jalen Ramsey is the exception to the system corner rule. And I think for the Raiders, this guy's still a really good player, right? If the Raiders are serious about competing, there are a couple of moves you can still make that definitely make your team a lot better. I already think the Raiders can compete with the current team right now, right? But I do think on the defensive side, you do got to add a little bit of talent. I think on the offensive line will have to develop, and there's nothing you can do with the offensive line, right? You can't go out there and just add a random offensive tackle and you're going to now be a great offensive line. Like, our offensive line just has to develop, right? You put the investments in. It's going to take time, but my hope is guards are positions where day one you can be a starting caliber guard. You can be a really, really good interior offensive lineman. We saw Jackson Powers-Johnson kind of do this from the moment he stepped in. Although I don't think Caleb Rogers is anywhere near the prospect Jackson Powers-Johnson was, I think he can still potentially step in and be a good guard. Then we still have the veterans, right? The Merediths, the Parhams, the Kappas. And then our right tackle, we do have DJ Glaze, who's now going into year 2, so he should theoretically be better, right? So those guys could technically develop into a good offensive line. Our receivers, I think, are phenomenal this year. I really, really do think this. Now, are we super explosive? We haven't shown it, right? In terms of Trey Tucker hasn't shown it consistently. Dante Thornton's a rookie, so we'll see what he can develop into. Jack Bash is similar to Jacoby Myers, where they're not super explosive in terms of how how fast and quick they are. They're not going to run away from people, but they're solid players, right? And of course, Besh is still a rookie, but like the investments have been made, right? It's these guys just got to come together and kind of get out there and get it done, right? But then you got Geno Smith and you got Ashton Genty, and Ashton Genty should be a top 5 offensive player, right, in terms of that explosiveness. You got Brock Bowers, who's about to come into year 2. I don't think Brock Bowers will go backwards at all this season, right? Like you get a year 2 dip from certain guys. That's not going to be Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers will get better in year 2, right? And our offense is there where it can compete with anyone, in my opinion. I think we can score 35 points any given week. I really do think that. And of course, we'll see how the O-line develops. The defense, I think you could still add a little bit, right? I think for the Raiders, you could still get better on the defensive side. Now, I do think a big part of what the Raiders are betting on this season on the defensive side is for the defensive line to dominate, right? And, you know, if you have a defensive line that could dominate, you could dominate any team or you can beat up on any team, right? Sometimes people think that, hey, you know, if a quarterback can just get the ball out super quickly, you kind of take the defensive line out. And that is partly true, but you know, if all you're relying on is your quick game, that means it's going to take you 17 plays to score a touchdown. On any given 17 plays, you could throw an interception. Or if out of those 17 plays, 4 of them are third downs, you can, you know, just one pass breakup and you get off the field on third down, right? So you can only throw the ball super quickly so many times on any given drive. At some point, you got to take 5 steps for 7 steps in your drop if you're a quarterback, and that's when that defensive line is going to eat, right? If Christian Wilkins, Maxx, Crosby, Adam Butler, and Koonce are all healthy, that's an elite-ass defensive line. And I think the Raiders are kind of betting on that. Plus, you're adding a bunch of guys that you would think Pete Carroll and Patrick Graham can kind of mold into and potentially put into a scheme and then just kind of have success, right? You're hoping Eric Stokes can have his career year, right? Year 5. You know, it's a whole new scheme and system. You're hoping he ends up being a good player this season. You're hoping Ja'Cory Bennett continues to develop and is, you know, year 3 is his best year and he ends up being a top 15 corner. You're hoping that Jeremy Chin can play the way he played last year, this year, just kind of repeat it. And you're just hoping these guys can kind of fit this scheme and system and just be solid and let the D-line kind of take over. The Raiders are in an interesting spot. We'll see what ends up happening. I think adding Jalen Ramsey does make you a lot better, though, right? We do have some unknown factors, and I think Ramsey, and that too, if you move him to safety this season, I think he could be an elite safety. We'll see what ends up happening. Let's wrap this up with a very, very, very interesting topic. Apparently, we could have in a flag football Olympics in 2028, which is in 3 years from now. And this would be very, very, very interesting. Now, obviously, we don't know who would play, right? But, like, could you imagine, like, Justin Jefferson out there and there's some, like, tech worker from India on the other side trying to cover him? That'd be ridiculous, right? Like, you know, obviously the NFL is an American sport, right? So we will dominate. And just you know, how quick and explosive our athletes are, especially in that game. It would not be close, right? But it would be fun to see that. And I would definitely tune in. I don't tune into anything Olympics. But if that was the case, if we had a flag football league or game or whatever, I would definitely tune into that, man. I think it'd be really, really fun to see Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill and Jack Besh potentially as well. Brock Bowers, right? Obviously, flag football, you know, you kind of take the offensive line and defensive line out of it. But regardless, it would still be fun. Now, it does technically need to get 24 of the 32 owners would have to vote for this to pass. I don't see why it wouldn't, right? I don't see why this would not pass. To me, this just makes sense for the owners to allow it to happen. Obviously, at that point, it's also up to these NFL players if they want to participate. Now, I do think some players are going to probably not participate, right? Especially if you're like Justin Jefferson. Do you really want to get hurt playing, you know, flag football? But I suspect some players will want to play. And honestly, like, you know, like Trey Tucker, for example, is probably a lot better than he's 100% better than every other corner that any other country can put out there, right? So, I don't know. It will be interesting. We'll see what ends up happening. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, man. I'm not feeling good today. But I wanted to make a video and just talk a little bit about some of the news that is kind of out there. You know, every day we always have little news things that kind of come out. And we'll see what ends up happening, man. There's a film breakdown that I'm kind of working on with Cody Lindenberg, which I told you guys would come out earlier never came out, but I hope it'll be done for tomorrow, and I'll get that posted tomorrow. So let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.